let's zero in on how the virtual environment is different from face-to-face. There's one thing that while it might seem like it's a little bit different, it isn't really, but engagement is more critical. Participants expect focused learning and that their needs are met. They want opportunities to learn from each other as well as from the facilitator. They want practical take-home tips and techniques, and they want to have the sense that their time was well spent. That's not really any different face-to-face or in webinars, and we often don't think about it. But that engagement aspect is even a little more critical here. Planning is more critical in a webinar environment, especially when it concerns the overall flow and pacing and timing. What happens when? For example, you typically can't exceed your time slot, so you need to have a plan B if things run short or long. What are you going to do if time runs short? What are you going to cut out? What are you going to add if you end up having extra time? It can be a lot more spontaneous face-to-face, and it can be spontaneous in the webinar environment, too. At the same time, you want to be sure and engage folks and do those kinds of things so that they're planned a little bit more so than you might do in a face-to-face program. When it comes to visuals, you have to keep in mind that content takes longer to present in the webinar environment than it does in face-to-face. So you typically want to use fewer slides than you might use face-to-face. Standard, kind of a rule of thumb, is 20 to 40 slides for 60 minutes. And for my part of the presentation, not counting the opening and that sort of thing, I actually have 28 for today's hour-long program. Typically, plan no more than 70 to 75% of the time for actual presentation content. That way you allow time for interaction, housekeeping items, etc. Because like radio, webinars have set time frames that must start and end on time. You can't move quickly through your slides, and speakers who haven't done this before often have a challenge with that. In a classroom or a meeting conference room, they can quickly click through a slide if they want to and not spend a whole lot of time on it. But we want to allow at least 30 seconds per slide for load time in a webinar to ensure that all the participants stay up with you. It's entirely possible that you may have something that if you click through it rapidly, the participants listening may be 3 or 4 slides behind you. So allow a minimum of 30 seconds per slide with your visuals. Also, the engagement and annotation tools, which we'll talk about in a minute, add to that aspect. Some of the special challenges that you might have become aware of, everybody mentioned that engaging, or the majority of people mentioned that engaging the audience is one of the biggest things to think about. That lack of visual connection drives a situation that you don't have in a face-to-face. You need to check in with people every once in a while, verbally, and asking them to do something on the slide, which I'm doing sporadically throughout the program as kind of a model of that. Your vocal technique, how you speak, is much more critical in a webinar environment. And if you've got a speaker that tends to speak in a monotone, you want to try and encourage them to be more conversational, varying the pitch and speed of their voice, because that's what participants are paying attention to with their minds while they look at the screen. In a face-to-face program, technology is supporting the program. Slides are a supporting visual. They're not the focus like they are in a webinar. But because they're the focus, you don't want to have them be too overcrowded with words, pictures. You want to keep them simple and clean. Online, in the webinar environment, your slides and voice are the focus. So you definitely want to avoid reading the slides. You want to add value and engage participants with their handout. One of the things that I'm doing right now is I've given you on page 4 are all these items that I'm talking about here and space for you to take notes. So that's an interactive handout and one way that you engage participants in the content, because hopefully they're looking at their handout and jotting notes while you're talking about the items. The last thing that is a little bit challenging when it comes to the webinar environment is something I come across a lot. People want to take what was a face-to-face program and adapt it for the webinar environment. There's a couple of key things to keep in mind if you want to do that. You want to take a look at your face-to-face objectives. You actually may need fewer objectives for a program that's presented as a webinar, and they might even be different because of the considerations of content taking a little bit longer to present. You want to take a look at your content session and flow. You might need to cut some content and add more interaction as a result of putting it online. Again, going back to that, what is a need-to-know content is going to achieve your objectives. And maybe there's some content that doesn't handle well virtually, so you might want to cut that out. You want to take a look at your visuals, your images, slides, etc. You might need to modify them, increase the number or the size, or change them to different types of visuals than you might use face-to-face. One of the things that you want to be really careful about because of something known as cognitive load is that you want to avoid redundant information. Don't just repeat verbally what's on the screen. And avoid a long lecture any more than about 5 to 10 minutes, and that's pushing it. You don't want to overload people so that they're just sponges soaking up what you have to say.